I just realized that like Winspear was kind of in this like circle of labels that I had kind of like dreamt of having on the show back when I started 5 years ago. And I don't know why it's taken so long to kind of make this connection, but I was just kind of thinking like there were labels in my mind that I followed on Twitter that I thought like this will be a guest I would like to have on the show. So I'm sorry that it's taken 5 years.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, I definitely remember when you first got going. I think it kind of like coincided with my, I feel like I think I discovered podcasts a while ago, but I got like really into podcasts around like 2018 or so. And
Yeah,
I feel
okay,
like
that's when
when
we
did,
started. Yeah,
is that when you
2018. Yeah,
started?
March. Yeah.
Yeah, and I feel like it just kind of like coincided with that, and I was just like loved learning about, lots of random things through podcasts, and
Yeah.
obviously I have an
Yeah.
interest in music and record labels, and like I think I would listen to your podcast and like the Breakthrough.
Oh,
Brian
right.
would do
Yeah.
interviews with record labels,
Yeah,
and
for sure. Yeah, yeah.
the
Yeah.
other I can't remember who else, but I always found them super interesting, just hearing everyone's story and like where they come from and
Yeah.
that. So
Yeah.
definitely appreciate what you're doing.
Oh no, that's cool. Well, I'm glad to be chatting with you. Um, I I want to ask you something right off the bat. Just kind of like going through your site and your roster and your projects and stuff. Something caught my eye like right away. I think it's beautiful. It's something I actually don't see a lot, but you guys have a label compilation that
Mhm.
you've done as like a pretty deluxe effort with vinyl and tapes and CDs and merch, and the artwork is gorgeous. Not a lot of comps are like pressed to vinyl. Like some people will just kind of like put something together on Bandcamp. So can you like, I know this is kind of like just start hitting the ground running, but like, can you kind of like share with us your strategy for that?
Yeah, I mean, I think that was something that like my label partner Ben had first brought up as an idea. I mean, I think something we were both kind of like interested in doing and figuring out how to do it. And I think his contribution to that idea was making this kind of like physical product and
Hmm.
physical artifact that would exist and, be able to kind of showcase a lot of the label's artists. And I think we both would have liked to time it perfectly with like a 5 year anniversary or
Yeah,
10 year
right, right.
anniversary, but it sort of felt like this was the time to do
Good.
it. Like
Yeah.
we kind of accumulated enough releases, and it was like
Yeah.
I think we were like 7 years in or something. It was
Mm.
kind of a random number,
The
but
seventh year itch.
yeah,
Yeah,
the
yeah,
seventh year itch. And
yeah.
so, I think we compiled, and we also, part of the reason too is like we had this like space at our pressing plant. And we were like, now's the time, like, let's like put
Oh, okay.
this, because it was kind of right during that like weird vinyl crunch as well, where it was like really
Oh,
hard to like get
oh,
stuff in.
yeah.
You have to wait like, you know, 8, 9, 10, 12 months. And so we'd kind of like reserved all this space in advance with our plant, who was being really accommodating and helpful. And we wanted to use some of that space, and we thought now's the perfect time. So we kind of got the physical side of it
Yeah,
together. And
yeah,
like as that was moving, we kind of like, thought about how can we kind of expand this into like the digital world and
yeah.
like do some things on that end. So it did kind of start on the physical realm first as the concept, and then we kind of expanded it from there.
I always think like, some of the artists that I've been on my label over the years, like years and years ago, they would say, we should do this, where we should, cover each other's songs, or we should put a comp together, or this kind of thing. And I always like was like, you know what, that's going to be cool to us, but to no one else. And I feel like comps like run the risk of being like self-indulgent a little bit. At the same time, like there's iconic, Fat Record compilations from years and years ago that like all of us had in high school on CD and stuff. So, and there's like smaller labels today that I'll download 30 tracks from Bandcamp, and there's something cool about that, especially if they have like a cohesive sound. So that's kind of like there's kind of a fine line there where it's like it is a little bit self-indulgent, but it's also like some fans really do appreciate it.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think I think kind of like riffing off of some of like Ben's initial ideas of the project, it was like, all right, how do we kind of like serve both purposes here, where it's like it is kind of like a celebration of all we've done, and it is like a bit self-indulgent, and it is kind of like for us in the like head, so to
Yeah.
speak,
Yeah.
and also make it kind of like financially viable, so it's not just, you know, gonna be a like, you know, vanity
Yeah.
project or something
Yeah.
like that. And so I think the way we did it, and it kind of worked where, you know, we just kind of had to go all in on it and treat it as like any other release, where it's like, all right, we're putting together like a full budget for it, like we're gonna like do some like PR and marketing around it, and we're
Yeah.
gonna have some like new digital releases as a part of it, so that way we can like pitch to editorial at
Oh,
like
cool.
Spotify and
Oh,
Apple,
cool.
and like get some like, you know, digital revenue generated for this project as well, so it can kind of have this like holistic, because I feel like with every release sometimes you don't really know what's going to happen with it, where it's like sometimes you have one song that
Yeah.
just like really takes off
Yeah.
on Spotify, or one song that really takes off on Apple, or just the vinyl does really well and the digital kind of stays in the like normal zone. And
Yeah.
so I think like being able to like check all those boxes and like set yourself up for as many possible like
Right.
moments is going to be beneficial.
Well, I think that I respect that you did vinyl and the other formats as well, but because it otherwise it's a playlist essentially. It's and you know and it's just a compilation. It's almost like you're telling people to take this seriously, and it's subconscious. It's like I think as a music fan, for me, when I go to your homepage and I see this, I click on this product, the artwork is totally up my alley. I really like it, and everything all together and the way it kind of that matches the tapes and it matches the merch and all of it. It's a campaign. It feels like a campaign. And
Totally.
so now I'm like, as opposed to being like, here's a playlist we put together of some of our tracks, even though it could be the exact same songs, but now I feel like I should be paying more attention to it.
Totally. Yeah. And that was the goal, to kind of like set up as a campaign, like, you know, do everything we do for a normal release, where it's like, here's the CD version,
Yeah.
here's the tape
Yeah.
version,
Yeah.
here's the focus track for digital, like, here's the press release about it,
Yeah.
all that kind of stuff.
Well, there's kind of a loss leader aspect to it too. I don't know if you found this, but like, I mean, like for giveaways at local record stores, or even the idea of having a Winspear compilation in record stores, like, I don't know. I feel like it's advertising as well.
Yeah. I think that's the other goal with it all, is like, you know, getting the name of the label out there to record stores. You know, we made a lot of promo CDs as well. That's something I remember, like, because both Ben and I interned at Secretly. Like, I interned on the label side and Ben interned on the distribution side. And, you know, part of being an intern would be like going up and like seeing the like shelves of promo CDs and like grabbing anything that was interesting to you. And,
Yeah.
you know, they distribute a lot of cool labels over there. And I remember like grabbing a Paradise of Bachelor sampler and grabbing, I think it was like a Constellation sampler.
Mm,
And there's just a lot of cool labels, and like
yeah.
checking out all these songs. And I think that's how I like discovered like the Weather Station, like, you know, one of
Wow.
my favorite artists
Yeah.
from one of those Paradise of Bachelor comps. And um, yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's just kind of a cool
Yeah.
way to do it. And they have like a system of like sending out those samplers as well. So it was something I've always wanted to do, is like tap into that and like just have this free sampler that could be sitting at record stores and
Oh,
people can
okay.
like, you know, discover. So they were like shipped out to like all these record stores as like freebies that they could like have at the counter as
Oh,
well.
that's really cool. Yeah, no, that's really cool. I think it's good. I mean, I think it's. Do you here? I'm sorry to be so in the weeds about this, and we'll move on. I promise. But
No.
that's kind of like you know, that's what everybody wants is some of these details. But my question for you would be: you did this at 7 years ish, and is this something like you talk about it being the right time? Is this something like you wouldn't necessarily do in year one, year two, year three? Like, is that kind of fair to say?
I think, I mean, like, are you asking if that's something, if I was talking to like a
Mm-hmm.
label that was
Yes.
just getting started today?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it depends. Like, if you're the kind of label that puts out a hefty amount of releases per year and you feel like you need to do that to shine a light on these releases and some of these, songs or titles that didn't get enough shine, or like, you're kind of putting out at enough pace that you can do that. For us, like, we've kind of always taken a less is more approach to like the number of releases we do every year. And
Right.
like, I think the most we've ever done was like 3 albums in a year.
Oh, wow.
Our Yeah, I mean, we do like EPs and singles, so it's
Yeah.
like
Sure. Sure.
there
Sure.
literally just wouldn't have. I mean, I think when we first started, we did a bit more because it was just like digital and cassette
Yeah.
only, and it was less of a like financial lift, and like also we didn't know what we were doing,
Yeah.
so
Yeah.
we didn't realize like how much time and effort it takes to like do a release properly,
Yeah.
and so I guess maybe my advice would be like wait a little bit until you've kind of built up a catalog and built up some names too, where like people could turn over to the back of the record and be like, oh, I know like 2 or 3 of these
Yeah.
artists, but I don't know the rest. So I'm going to grab this and like, you know, check out the rest of them.
Yeah.
Because I think there is some psychology to it as well when you're kind of listening to, if you are thinking of it in the basic, just like playlist mentality of like, we curated this playlist for people. Like people like to hear things that they're familiar with already mixed in with things they don't.
Sure.
And it's like harder to digest something that you're just like 100% completely unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
There are the crate diggers and like, the
Yeah.
folks who really enjoy just like digging into something they've never heard before or
Yeah.
completely unfamiliar with it. But I think most people need some sort of entry point
Right.
to be able to, enjoy it the same way.
The black vinyl, I was kind of surprised by because it really matches the design of the album cover. I don't know if you did another variant, but I saw that it was black vinyl. And it's funny because I was recently thinking about how I always feel pressured to do some sort of like cool vinyl color on a project. But there's been some cases where I'm like, I think black would work the best with this album cover. And I know with your compilation, it's black and white. And so it looks like black makes a ton of sense. But I don't know. I don't know about you, but I feel pressure like people are not going to buy a record if it's not a cool color.
Definitely. I feel that pressure. I think for this project, we were like aware that like there was like a vanity aspect to it. And we
Yeah.
were like, I think stylistically, we wanted to keep it black and white
Yeah.
and minimal. Like that
Yeah.
was the whole goal, but also just like 500 black vinyl. That's as cheap as you can go,
Yeah.
So,
Right.
that felt like the obvious move for
Yeah.
both reasons.
Yeah.
And, I, you know, I think that's a great point. I do always feel pressured as well to do the color version. And I think part of that is just from like the marketing aspect of like sharing these vinyl colors. You're like,
Yeah.
the different colors pop. You can like coordinate. It's just like, kind of like curating like an outfit that you'd wear in
Yeah.
a day.
Yeah.
You're like, oh, let me match this vinyl color to this center label or
Yeah.
this vinyl
Yeah.
color to like
Yeah.
that little orange square in the artwork and
Yeah.
like really make it pop. It's kind of like it's fun to play with that. And when you're just working with black, it's just like that's what you got. And
Yeah, and it becomes more about like I think diehard music fans who want the music, they really don't care to a certain extent. Like vinyl collectors care, but I think if you want a record on vinyl, you just want a copy of it. Whereas I feel like you're right about that matching component because I think hundreds of thousands of people will see your vinyl on Twitter, the mock-ups on Twitter and Instagram, but only like a few hundred people actually will own a copy. So it's almost like I think clothing is a great example because like you're dressing it up for all these people just to impress all these people on Instagram and posting the screenshots on Twitter. And they're maybe not your customer, but they just look at it and go, oh, that's cool. That's how I think about it.
Totally. Yeah, but I agree. And I think we are trying to like step back and be like, all right, let's not just make the color because you have to.
Yeah.
We're,
Yeah.
we just started working with this new artist, Lutalo, that I'm really excited for, and we're reissuing their first EP on vinyl, and we're just going to do all black, which is the first time we've done that in a minute. We've done that
Mm,
before, but
yeah.
it is like it is just an EP, so it's like we
Yeah.
want to save some juice for like there's going to be another EP coming out later this year, and we're like, all right, let's like start with all black vinyl and then
Yeah.
like introduce the color vinyl there, and then it's like
Yeah.
there'll be an album down the line too, and
Sure.
we gotta save you gotta save a little gas in the tank, so to
That's a
speak.
good point. Yeah, it's a good point actually to kind of like almost like relegate like EPs or something like so that when the album comes out and it's a big campaign, a big package, it blows you away. That's kind of smart.
Yeah, and it's
Yeah.
definitely tempting to be like, yeah, like, oh, we can make this cool color match
Yeah.
this thing or
Yeah.
whatever. But I think, holding back a little bit is good too. And
Yeah.
sometimes just having the vinyl at all is cool to people.
I'm going to ask you more about design and aesthetic in a little bit because I've noticed a trend with your label and everything looks great. By the way, this happens all the time on this show, and I love it. And I'm like doing research for a label, and I'm like just going deep diving through the releases. And I don't know about you, but like my Apple Music library or iTunes library, as it used to be known, is like just tons of thousands of records, and I don't know where they came from. And I saw
Mhm.
in your roster the Major Murphy EP, I think it's Lafayette, and I saw that on your page. And I don't know how I ever came across that, but I streamed that years ago, like nonstop one spring or summer. And
Nice.
yeah, it was cool because I was like, oh, that's their record. That's just it's just funny. I don't know how on earth I would have ever come across it. Obviously, just the normal, like on Twitter or something. But anyway,
Totally. Yeah,
that's,
that EP is a special, and I feel like a lot of the songs on that project were like the first songs we had ever heard from Major Murphy slash
okay.
Jacob, who's like, the primary songwriter in
Okay.
that project. And he had just uploaded those on Bandcamp. And we kind of he actually reached out to us about playing a show, and that's kind of how we
Yeah.
discovered him through
Yeah.
his Bandcamp stuff. And like we were like, this is amazing, do you want to like put out these songs? Like we were ready to put them out, and he was like, actually, I want to start a band called Major Murphy. And like that's my solo
Yeah.
stuff, like
Yeah.
we're gonna do a band. So there's this like years long, like here's the band's first EP, here's the
Yeah.
band's second EP, here's the record, the debut record for the band. And those songs were like demo versions that ended up on that record.
Right.
And then, that song Come By Sunday was just an amazing song. Like we have to like
So
put
good.
this out one way or the other. And this was like kind of the only way we could like convince Jacob and the rest of the band to like put it out as this kind of like, B-sides EP thing.
Yeah. I hate that whenever I hear something, I'm like, this is amazing. Let's release this. And their artists are like, oh, no, 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 no. That's like, that's a scratch vocal take. We got to, or I'm not doing that song anymore. Like, I'm like, no, this is so good.
Yeah. And I totally get it. I think Jacob like envisions that song. He's got like a grander vision for it,
Right.
which
That's
I'm
fair.
excited for. And I think it can still, down the road, like
Yeah.
I'm sure it'll be created at some point.
Yeah.
Just like in the meantime, I think it's cool to kind of release the other versions of this stuff too.
The funny thing is like I said, I came into that EP just in the normal, like saw it, clicked on it, listened to it, and didn't stop listening to it. And I think it's funny because now as I went into and actually just yesterday I was digging deeper into the discography of the band, and I was realizing like what you're saying is that this was kind of like a demo version of some of these songs appeared somewhere else. And it's funny, like I didn't know that as a fan. I didn't know that this was like a compilation of different ideas that would be something else. I just thought it was a great EP. But then when all of a sudden now you put these poison into my brain that, oh no, these songs are not supposed to be, this is not the final version. But it's just funny how us as music fans, like we don't hear all of that. We just enjoy something for what it is. I think that's kind of cool.
Totally. And, I think, I think there's like inherent value in both, you know. It's like the demo versions like are what got me really into like Jacob's songwriting and
Hmm.
like, you know, what is possible with this band. And it's like some of those demos that were re-recorded ended up being some of their biggest songs, you know, and
Sure.
it's like the
Yeah,
re-recording and like adding that shine in the studio like really did like take it an extra
that's
like,
cool.
100 miles for them or whatever.
I don't know if I noticed this properly, and I don't know if this is a thing you were involved with or if you've done before on your label, but it seemed to me like they had like a major release and then an EP, like a kind of a auxiliary EP with demos and such. And they did that. It seems to me that they've done that twice. Is that like a strategy that you were involved with, or like what's your opinion on that? Because I'm a big fan of like doing your studio thing, but then like not being precious about your demos, releasing your demos, and basically like feeding the machine with anything that's on your iPhone or hard drive. So can you tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah, I think that's something that we always suggest. Like, I think we call it like phase two, you know.
Oh, nice. Yeah.
And it's like phase one is like the album
Yeah.
campaign, and like phase two is the like pointing people
Oh,
back to the
cool.
album kind
Cool.
of thing.
Yeah.
Um,
I'm
and
stealing that.
yeah, I think it's a super fun thing. Like, I definitely get it. Like, as a music fan, sometimes I'm like, I don't want to hear this like weird remix or like this demo,
Yeah.
but then sometimes it's like amazing and it's
Yeah.
like a really cool artifact. And it just depends on your level of fandom for each band. And sometimes I think there's ways to like, toy with that if it's like maybe don't call this a demo, maybe give it a different name and
Yeah.
people, like you said, don't have that like poison in their brain that
Good
it's like
point.
not gonna be as
Yeah.
good.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't call it a demo. That's cool.
Yeah, we kind of, we did like a phase two thing with this band Slow Pulp when we put out their debut record. We were kind of talking about, all right, what would be like the B sides with it, or like phase two, and they were going to record some acoustic versions, and instead of calling them like Idaho acoustic, we like had the idea to like rename them just like different song names entirely, and
Wow.
that I feel like, any discerning fan would
Yeah.
know, like, oh yeah, this is the acoustic version of that song. And I think we named them such that it's like pretty obvious that it's like, related to the other song,
Very cool.
but just enough where it's like someone who wouldn't know would just take it for what it is. And I liked that a lot because it kind of gave, you the best of both worlds in some ways.
I'm totally stealing that idea. I love that because I often do an acoustic version of a record and an instrumental version, and I recently did an instrumental version of a record, and they're not just the vocals stripped away, but there's some instruments that didn't make the mix that are now being used, and vice versa, and then I did a different track listings, but I like the different name version. That's really cool. I think I love that you said phase two. And I really want our listeners to pick up on this because so many times people are like, I release a record and then it gets forgotten. And so thinking about what's happening after release day, something we talk about a lot. But when you said phase two, I kind of thought of like the small indie artists version of like going on tour and getting TMZ headlines because like, Taylor Swift can release a record and then depending on who she's dating or not dating, and then the global world tour, she's going to be in the news cycle. Even same thing for like Phoebe, like they're going to be in the news cycle for the next year in that phase two for non-music things. And so it's kind of like for us, we have to kind of have like our own way to get into like the feed, and I feel like these type of little releases or like I don't know, like artist commentaries or different, a YouTube series is our way of doing that. I don't know. I like that term
Totally.
phase two.
Yeah, and I think often what happens when you do like put out an album and like people take notice of it is, you get invited on tour by a larger band,
Yeah.
or, you go do your own headline tour. And often those things don't line up perfectly timeline wise with
Yeah.
your like album rollout. So
Right.
it's like having this kind of like phase two content or material in the bag, so to speak, you can then you can like slot that in with that, you know, ahead of that big headline tour or ahead of that, like, you know, cool sport tour that you got or some other
Yeah.
thing, you know, and just kind
Yeah.
of have it ready to go when the
Yeah.
time's right.
Love it. Love it. Okay. That was a good 31-minute cold open. Now I want to ask you, welcome. I want to ask you about the history of your label. So you mentioned it goes back to 2015. So can you tell me like how this all got started?
Yeah. So I guess technically it goes back a little farther before we started the label.
Okay.
You know, I think around, I don't remember if it was 2013 or 2014 at this point, but you know, Ben and I met in college in Bloomington in at Indiana University. We were both going there. I think I was like a senior at the time, and he was a freshman, and we linked up, and I was doing like an extra year for some like grad school stuff, and so I was going to be around a little longer, and like um, I think we kind of quickly realized we had like a similar taste in music and like a similar
Mm-hmm.
appreciation for like smaller bands, like up and coming kind of artists. And we started through kind of doing more shows and like booking and promoting shows in Bloomington. And we would do, it was kind of under like Winspear Presents, and
Okay.
we do house shows like at Ben's house. He had some roommates, and you know they'd kind of throw these like house party, house show um, situations,
Mm-hmm.
and we'd, you know, bring in bands and like but then we also would start doing like booking shows at like the Bishop, like the local Bloomington venue, and there's another spot called the Block House. We do a lot of shows, and it kind of just became a thing where we could, you know, bring in bands that we really liked and paired them with like local or regional bands that we really liked as well. And it just kind of snowballed from there. And like I think from the start of that, there was always this idea of like starting a label. And I don't know if I would have ever done it if like Ben wasn't like, oh, let's do this thing. You know,
Okay.
like I think it was something I was always interested in, but maybe never had like the gumption to just like go start on my own.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I mean, I think in that way, like we've made a great team, and like, you know, him kind of bringing that energy, and you know, me being like, all right, yeah, let's do it. Like, here's how it'll go, or something like
Can I
that. You
ask
know?
you, why did you like why were you booking shows? Like what part of your personality or your gifts were you like wanting to get into the music scene or finding yourself in that role?
Totally. I played in bands like since, I mean, I was in middle school, I guess. I
Okay.
like, you know, always had some band that I was, you know, starting or playing in or something. And so I mean, I had like booked a lot of shows for my band and like a lot of tours for my band, like even in high school and
Mm-hmm.
like early
Mm-hmm.
college. And I'd kind of like been through all that and like met a lot of bands on tour and like, you know, just playing different shows. And like I think kind of through doing that and realizing, you know, there's all this great music out there that like just no one knows about,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
that's it. And that there's a lot that can be done to kind of like bring and like support and uplift these artists in Bloomington, but also just like generally.
Yeah. So
Um,
so was it 2015 where you were like, this is we have a name, we have a website, like talk to me about that, like launch.
Yeah, I'm a little, you know, like we're getting, you know, close to 10 years on now at this point.
Okay.
It's like I get a little murky about exactly what the timeline was, like
Yeah.
when we launched the website, because I know we were doing some like when Spear presents stuff, and
Yeah.
Ben, you know, Ben is like very into like, you know, hitting up the like booking agents and like
Sure.
talking to them and like seeing what bands are coming through and all that stuff. So we were kind of like setting that stuff up. We might have had the website going a little before the label officially started, but
Mm-hmm.
I put the like label launch date as 2015 with our first release.
Right.
And it was this band from I think when we started the label, this was either at the end of 2014 or 15, when we were like, we're going to do the label. We just like ask a bunch of our friends if they wanted to be on our website,
Yeah. I
which
did the
was,
same thing. Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, which I think is something a lot of people do. which
Just to look
I would
legit
say,
right away.
yeah, just to
Yeah.
look legit. Well,
Yeah.
it was like, hey, like we want to work with you eventually. Like a
Sure.
lot of these artists, like were just local bands. They didn't ever record their music. They
Yeah.
didn't have anything to put out. A lot of the bands that we asked to do that never even got to that point. They
Yeah.
broke up before then, or whatever. You know, we were in
Yeah.
college. People graduate and move away. It's just like
Totally.
how it goes. And so like one of those people we'd ask to be on our website, and there was a little bit of like, it wasn't just like asking whoever, it was like people we were like
Yeah. Yeah.
had book shows for or friends with, or we liked their music. And one of the people we'd ask was like Kevin Krauter, who we'd like heard a demo of once, and we were like, that stuff's really cool. Like, let's ask him to be on our website. And he was like super stoked to be on our website, which was like really funny.
Yeah, yeah.
And like Kevin definitely ended up being like an integral part of like the early label days. And but our first release was some friends of mine from Evansville called Thunder Dreamer, which is where I grew up,
Okay.
in Evansville, Indiana, which is like, you know, essentially, you know, Kentucky. It's so far south in Indiana.
Okay.
But yeah, they'd released some stuff on Bandcamp that I thought was just amazing, but like, you know, had never put it up on like the streaming services or like, you know, made any sort of physical versions of it. And I think 2015 was like, you know, maybe a little before that too, was that sweet zone where like a lot of artists didn't see the like upside of like putting their music on like iTunes, Spotify, Apple Music, any of that stuff. It wasn't really what it is today. And so, you know, I think for a lot of those early bands and artists, it was a lot of just being like, hey, like really like your stuff. Like we could put this up on the streaming services and like make a run of cassette tapes for you kind of thing. And so
Yeah.
I think Thunder Dreamer, we essentially like, you know, reissued more or less like their first EP and their first record and like got it up on streaming services and like made some cassettes and CDs. And, you know, that was it. I don't think we knew what else to do beyond that. But
Well,
that was the first release.
I was the same way around that time because it was like if you could figure out how to get music on streaming platform. Well, there Spotify. I don't even know if like Spotify just broken into North America. I think around that time, but it certainly was not like mainstream. And so like it was maybe just like iTunes downloads, and so yeah, I'm just like. But the one thing that like labels had was that we could like figure out how to get their music on to those platforms, and artists had no idea. Now artists have an idea, but back then.
Totally. And I think a big inspiration for me was like, you know, my band at the time when I was in college, we were like releasing our music through another Indiana record label called Jurassic Pop Records, which like shout out to those guys, Jeff and Dylan. They're awesome. And they, I feel like they definitely were like an early model for us of like, oh, and like, you know, going through that experience of like releasing our tape through them, I'm like, oh, like I could do this. You know, it's like,
yes, yeah.
I see what they're doing. Like not in a, like, I could do this for my own band. Cause I definitely like appreciated like the value that they brought. And like, definitely in Indiana, it felt like oh yeah, like having their name on our cassette tape or like their name behind us felt really, you know, cool. And,
that's nice. Yeah.
And more so of like, oh, I see like the model and how it could work and how like I could do this with other artists.
That's
and
really
so that
cool.
was definitely like a, you know, eye opener of just seeing someone else doing it and realizing that it's like, you know, not this like elusive thing.
Sure. So booking shows and being involved with the artist's live aspect is not something that labels are certainly not traditionally involved with, and most labels aren't too involved with that. Are you still involved with that, or how did that transition from putting on these showcases, or sorry, these live events into you started a label? Is that something you abandoned, or have you kept that going?
I mean, we don't do any like Winspear Present shows anymore, and we haven't since like, I don't know, 2018 or something.
Right.
But I think, you know, we still do like most years we've done like a South by showcase, which
Okay.
like
Yeah.
I think our experience doing shows like makes that a lot simpler for us to do.
Yeah.
And like we most years the pandemic definitely derailed this tradition, but we were doing like a annual like we call it the Winspear Review, which is like a just a label showcase, and it has kind of like moved cities every year, and we'll
Yeah.
bring together
Oh,
like
cool.
3 or 4 of our artists and just like have a show.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
it's always really fun just
Yeah.
kind of hanging out and getting to like make a cool poster that our friend designs, and
Yeah.
just kind of like do that whole thing.
The you talked a little bit about college, and I remember like I kind of met some of these guys I was started the label with. They were in college at the time, and and the bands we were working for were in college, and they were all in the same like basically we could like put on a show and they could just tell all their friends and hundreds of people would come out, and everybody in college in the winter, everybody's excited and looking for something to do. And then that disappears like in the summer. And then the next year, those people are in a different program or gone. And it's like, I remember thinking so confidently, like, oh my goodness, we just built a scene overnight. And then it disappeared. And then of course, like people get jobs and have kids, and you realize like you don't have that as easily anymore. It's kind of sad.
Totally. Yeah. And I mean, I guess that's just life in some ways. And it's like, maybe people would say it was sad if you just kept doing that, for 10 years, so it's like,
Yeah, good point.
it's the one constant in life, right?
Yeah.
Change.
Yeah, that's true. So does your label have like a North Star or like some sort of like tangible or intangible parameters? Maybe it's like artwork and aesthetic of your releases. I personally see that. I feel that. You obviously do, a small amount of releases every year, which is kind of cool. As a curator of the label, are you able to put your finger on whatever it is that you like and that you think is Winspear?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's ebbed and flowed through the years what that is as far as like what the fingerprint is, or like what we're kind of searching for as like this is the Winspear sound or aesthetic or look or something like that. And it's always changing and evolving as we as people change and evolve, and our tastes change and evolve. And where we live and like how much time we're spending on this thing or that thing or what have you. But I think it is the components of like what it has been up to this point, at least, has been like the components have been in myself and like our tastes. And like if you look at it, if you think of visualize us as like a Venn diagram, and it's like where our two circles intersect,
Yeah.
And I think that it's like we have all sorts of tastes and interests and like, visual aesthetic preferences. And a lot of the stuff is where these tastes intersect. But also, it's like also an intersection of what the artists like as well. Cause we're not very like prescriptive about like, what the artwork needs to look like.
Sure.
Or like, we're pretty hands off in that world. Like we definitely want to guide the conversation towards something that like we like and want to like represent.
Yeah.
But most of the time that's part of the A&R process too, where it's like we're probably not going to work with an artist if we feel like it's not going to align visually as well with like at least like
that's
something that I
interesting.
could like.
Yeah, I never thought of that. Like in that kind of like courting period, it's not necessarily just about the music. That is kind of interesting. I mean, obviously you're meeting them and kind of getting a sense of their personality and their character, but even something down to like their aesthetic and their artwork is kind of interesting.
Yeah, I think for better or for worse, and it's like sometimes not having a strong vibe is a vibe in some ways, or that is an aesthetic. Like it just depends from artist to artist, and I don't think we're like looking for artists that have like an in-house graphic designer on
Right.
their,
Yeah,
their
yeah.
bass
Yeah.
player is like an excellent
Yeah.
graphic designer or something like that.
Yeah.
But it's like having a look like that does help kind of like sell it for me personally,
Yeah.
and like I do think for a lot of other people too, it's like there is more to all of this than like just the one dimensional aspect. And I
That's so
think
true. I completely
we're,
agree.
yeah,
Yeah.
we're multidimensional creatures. So we
Hmm.
gotta be able to experience that with,
Yeah.
what we're interacting
Yeah,
with.
for sure. You were talking a little bit about when we were talking about the compilation, you were talking about how you have these kind of like multiple touch points and these multiple like I always think of them like as multiple kicks of the can, whether it's like a new something you can pitch to Spotify as like in streaming world, and then of course like the vinyl, and then the giveaway sampler component. What has worked for you? Is there a part of the business model for your label that you rely on financially, or is it a bunch of things, or that just all like the pie is evenly split, or is there something that is like you found to be works well for you as a leader and for your customers?
Yeah, I mean, I'd say digital is definitely like a big component for us. It sort of, and I don't know if that's just like the time we came up in and like the era that we started the
Mm-hmm.
label was right in that sweet zone where it's like you could just like email a couple people at Spotify or Apple and like get on this or that playlist and it'd start racking up the streams,
Right,
but
right.
like I definitely like think of our releases as the digital release being like the primary component of it and everything kind of being an extension of that in some
Mm,
ways.
mm,
Um, it's like if you think about like catalog numbers or something, like in my mind, like the digital release is like the root catalog
right.
number, like the
Yeah.
root of all that. And then everything else is kind of like ancillary to that. And in
Mm,
the sense, it's like that's where you start, right? It's like before you do anything with the release, it's like you got to have those like, finished mastered versions
yeah.
of the record in, wave format or
Yeah.
whatever. And
Yeah.
kind of like start working on the vinyl, start working
Yeah.
on the cassette, like
Yeah.
sending it around to publicists, like pitching it for sync, like all that kind of stuff. So I guess if I'm like categorizing things, like that is definitely an important part. And also we've built the business for that to be like an important, like reliable source of our income. But vinyl is important as well. Like
Hmm.
that is an important aspect. Like sync, we've definitely like had some luck with that and had some like, count on that as one of the many streams.
Yeah.
But I'm sure as like anyone would say, it's like a combination of all of it. And it's
Yeah.
like
Yeah.
even the digital component as well, it's like, it's not all just Spotify. It's like,
Sure.
there's like Apple Music, there's Amazon, there's Bandcamp, there's like
Yeah.
all these other places where it's like every piece of it kind of adds up. And even though Spotify is the majority of it,
Well,
it's yeah.
that's a smart point. I mean, two smart points, but yeah, you're right. I mean, multiple revenue streams is so key for any business and as a record label. But you're talking about multiple revenue streams within those multiple revenue streams. And like you mentioned the streaming things, but even vinyl can be, you have retail, you can have direct to customer, you can have like a club that you run, or that you have like a giveaway or a contest component to your vinyl. That's so profound. Yeah, I hadn't really thought about that.
Yeah, and I mean, even within Spotify, right? It's like there are so many different stream sources and sources of revenue where you're talking about like revenue from playlists versus revenue from like radio versus revenue from like the algorithmic like discovery
Yep.
playlists versus just people going to your profile.
And
And
then
it's
just your
like,
fans.
yeah,
Yeah.
just your fans. And
Yeah.
like, for better, for worse now, those are even different pay rates that you're getting for
Right.
those things.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
some artists like do better in one area or the other. And, it kind of maybe will help in knowing that that's the case and where that money's coming from or where that success
Mm.
is coming from will like help inform your decisions about like what to do next for that artist or maybe to try that same strategy or a piece of that strategy for another release or something like that.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think I never really put my finger on it, but I do think of the digital as the as the parent, as the primary. Like I do think of that. I often, because the vinyl, you're splitting up the sides, and then the cassettes, you have to kind of match the sides. So I've done alternate track listings for those, and alternate artwork for the vinyl, for various reasons. And so I kind of feel that way too, thinking about my digital as like, that's the main, and ultimately that is what sells the most copies if you combine the streams,
Right.
So yeah, that's kind of interesting.
Yeah, and it's the thing that'll also usually keep going.
It lives on.
It lives on, where
Yeah.
it's like, maybe the vinyl will go out of print, or like,
Yeah.
the artist will stop touring, and like, but like maybe people will keep streaming that record for, years. So
Yeah.
it's like,
Yeah.
that's definitely, yeah,
Yeah.
feels
So true.
right.
We had this album that kind of just really hit back in 2015, and it still does. And the artist had like completely retired and like became a hermit. And he messaged me maybe a couple months ago and was like, I think we should take that album off streaming. I'm not really being an artist anymore. So I took it off streaming, and then I got all these emails from people being like, it just disappeared. Where'd it go? And I feel bad for them because like I get it. Like, I think everybody just thought it would be there for eternity, and now it's gone. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure that's cool though, to like, I think artists sometimes forget like how many people, because you just see these like, you compare yourself to like this larger artist that has like 500,000 monthly listeners or something like that.
Yeah,
And it's like, here you are with like, you're like 10,000 monthly listeners, and you're like, man, like no one listens to my music really. Like there's not that many people.
Yeah.
It's like, you forget like there's like 10,000 people out there listening to your
Oh my
music. And if you
gosh.
took it down, like you'd probably get like 100 emails of people
Oh my
asking
gosh.
you
Yeah.
where their favorite record went.
Oh my gosh. That's so true. And have you ever heard, like, somebody told me one time, it's like, I mean, 10,000 is a massive number, but like, even if you had 250 monthly listeners, put 250 people in a club, and you're going to feel pretty good about yourself. You know what I mean? If you're playing to that many people. I often think about that too on YouTube. Like, you might have like 50 views on a video or 100 views, but put those people in your house to listen to you speak, and that's going to feel pretty good.
Yeah. And it's tough because it's like, just having, 250 monthly listeners or 10,000 monthly listeners, it's like that doesn't mean that you have a career off of it.
No,
per se.
sure. Yeah.
And like, I mean, I think some people are able to make it work through different ways, but like, that from Spotify alone is not going to be enough for you,
totally.
as an artist. So it's like, it does feel tough when it's like, that's your, barrier to like, doing it full time, or like your threshold or something like that. But it definitely doesn't mean your art isn't valuable or like important to people or meaningful, and that's also like a cool thing to think about.
I want to ask you a completely impossible and pointless question, but would you start the label again today, knowing what you know and what you've experienced? You talk about this sweet spot in 2015, and there's been sweet spots over the past few decades, and there's been not sweet spots. But if you had to restart today, would you do that?
I mean, do I get to have the knowledge that I know now or not?
I don't know. I've never played this game before. Sure. You can have the knowledge. Yeah.
Yeah. If I have the knowledge I know now, I definitely would do it. And I feel like I could get to where I am now a lot faster, because I know all of my past mistakes. Maybe not even mistakes is the right word, but just learning the hard way of like how to do a record campaign properly, like having all these connections to, the networks that have been set up and whatnot. I feel like you could move a lot faster through all the different phases.
You know what? And it's like, but that's obviously not how life works. And I think it's so funny because I talk to some people and they're kind of discouraged about how their label's going, and it's been maybe 6 months or it's been a year. And I kind of like, I try to delicately tell them, like, like, give it 5 to 10 years. You know what I mean? And I think you'll figure it out. And it's like, that's like super hard for anyone to hear. But anyone who has stuck it out can look back over 7 years or 8 years and be like, well, I'm glad I stuck it out because it's starting to work. I'm starting to figure this out.
Yeah, totally. I feel like it took us like 3 or 4 years before we kind of were like, okay, like I see a path for how we can like, really like make each record like, stick out, or like, this is how it should be done. It's like when we first started doing it, we didn't even know how it should be done. Like, we were just trying, you're just like flailing in the deep end sort of, but,
I find it's like collecting,
you figure it out.
I find it's like collecting like the things you definitely don't want to do again or you don't need to do, and the things that you do want to do and you should do. And it's just like collecting more and more of those things. That to me is like what success is. It's like, you don't need to do this, do more of this.
Yeah, totally. And I think it's like also having the time component is like giving yourself the ability to like take all these risks, where it's like normally like I don't think we would have I think back in 2015 like pressing vinyl would be like a huge risk, and like maybe like planning some tour for this artist, or like taking a trip out to New York to meet with like people about this artist. Like some of these things would be like a huge risk that we wouldn't do, but it's like doing them, kind of like adding on one extra layer like each time we do a new release, and like realizing you can do it, and realizing kind of like the financials and like how it all fits together allows you to kind of like take that step on the next one. And I think that's kind of like part of the process as well. I think it took us like 2.5 years of doing the label before we did our first vinyl release.
Do you think risk taking is something that you should have done earlier? Do you think that's like a real key component to things? Because that's the hardest thing to do.
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say like, oh, if we would have done, pressed this to vinyl or that to vinyl, like it would have gone. And like, I do think we got lucky in that like the first thing we pressed to vinyl was like definitely like, should have been pressed to vinyl and like really worked out.
Yeah,
and like,
good.
because I've definitely like known other labels who it's like they felt like they just pressed all the wrong releases to vinyl when you're in that early zone and you're trying to decide like what gets the vinyl treatment, what gets the cassette treatment, what's digital only. Like, you have to kind of have the ability to maybe like separate like what, like, having that path for it or something like that to like sell through 500 copies versus like an artist where it's like, this record's amazing, but it's like, they're going to do 3 shows for the rest of the year and that's it. And it's like, that's probably not going to be a great investment,
So there's a bit of like discernment you have to kind of learn or gain somehow.
Yeah, totally. Or like, you have to like, I think like for us, like linking up with Secretly Distribution too was like a big confidence boost in the sense of like knowing that if we press this record and like put it through their distribution network, like we're going to be able to move like, 300 to 500 copies, maybe like 300 copies alone through that. And that kind of gives you that boost of like, okay, well, if they can move 300 copies through Secretly and like we can move like this many number through our web store and the band can move this many through their tour, it's like this can happen. This is like viable,
That's the best. I mean, that is really, to me, that's been like the game changer. And I feel like that's the threshold that you can cross over is when you have certain copies, especially for physical, that are spoken for, then to me, which you can't have in the digital world. So and we talked to a label, I think there was a label once who had like a membership group who like people paid an annual fee to get every record they released that year. And so moving forward for the year, whatever quantity they pressed, they knew they had 100 records already sold. And
Joyful Noise, right?
Yeah, maybe it was Joyful Noise. Yeah, I thought it was specialist subject from the UK, but
Oh,
Joyful Noise,
they might
they
do
probably
that as
have,
well.
yeah, they probably have a plan for that too.
Yeah, Indiana label gotta,
Yeah,
gotta shout out the
yeah, yeah,
Indiana
yeah,
folks.
yeah.
But
Either
yeah, they
way,
have that subscription model, which
yeah,
I think is super cool. And like,
yeah,
yeah, that definitely like helps like their decision making process about like, how to do their
yeah.
pressings. It's a different calculus for them, than it is for another label.
And if you combine that with, let's say, like you mentioned, a distributor, and you've combined that with like the fan base, like your fan base can for sure buy 20 to 50, and the band's fan base, the band, if 5 people in the band, each one should be able to sell at least 10 copies on their own. Like you can kind of do that math and go, all right, I think we're going to have 150 of the 200 taken care of. Let's move forward.
Yeah, totally. And yeah, sometimes it's just like you got to do that math in your head and like, think about it. Sometimes there's a little more of just the like, I believe people will hear this and like it. And, it'll move, but obviously, there's different kind of factors connected to all of it.
Yeah, totally. Listen, it's been so great to chat with you. Thank you so much for doing this. I love doing this, and it's so great to hear somebody's perspective, because these little things that I've thought about, or I know, but I hadn't really thought about, and for you to give it a name, I appreciate it.
Of course. Yeah. Thanks for taking the time to chat with me. Happy to do it.